Managers matter. Managers are perhaps the single biggest positive influence in an organization, or negative influence if they make some of these common mistakes. Hey leader, David Burke is here, organizational psychologist and author of 5 best-selling books on helping leaders and teams do their best work ever, including the new one, Best Team Ever, which is obviously about how to help teams do their best work ever. More info on that at the link in the comments. Look, managers make a difference. Managers probably make the difference, the single biggest difference between success and failure in an organization. Yeah, senior leaders set the strategy for sure, but it's middle managers and frontline managers that make the difference around individual teams and their collaboration and whether or not the strategy can get executed on. That's probably why Gallup found that 70% of the variance in whether or not individual employees were engaged came from factors that were directly influenced by the manager. In other words, it came from whether or not managers were making very simple mistakes or whether or not they were thriving. And so in this episode, we're gonna outline 4 common mistakes that managers make, and reversing these mistakes should raise the level of engagement and the level of motivation and performance on your team, and hopefully throughout the whole organization. So the first common mistake managers make is they talk first. When you are in a leadership role, one of the first things you are gonna find is that your suggestions, your comments become orders. And so it's incumbent upon you to not give those suggestions and comments first. Because if you just sit down into a meeting, let's say we're trying to brainstorm ideas for how to solve a problem, we're trying to come up with a plan of action for how we're going to execute on a strategy. If you jump in and say, okay, here's the situation we're facing and here's what I think, the rest of that meeting is going to be about your ideas. Yeah, people might share their ideas as well, but it's going to be in the context of what you said, in response to what you said. And so it's going to set the tone. Now, there may be times where you need to do that, but those times are probably far less often than you think. And that's why after you set the tone for the meeting, after you outline all the details, after you give the sort of status update and tee up the question being discussed or the problem that needs to be solved, stop talking. Start facilitating. Start making sure that every person on the team is given an opportunity to share their opinion and everyone is given an opportunity to respond to everyone else's opinion. And only after everyone else has had an opportunity to weigh in, then you can weigh in. You might find you don't even need to weigh in though, because you'll probably find that someone else on your team has already shared what's basically your idea. And in that case, your job as a facilitator continues. If you want, you can steer the team toward that idea, right? Or if there's another idea that's winning, you can make the judgment call on whether or not you want to let that idea win. It really just depends on how much of a servant leader you can afford to be in that moment, or how much more you've got to look out for maybe some variables that they don't see, etc. Regardless, you're gonna make a lot more traction with your team if you talk last and you let the team arrive at those solutions. They're gonna be more motivated to execute on it, and everyone on the team is gonna feel a lot more included in the idea as well, which means they're gonna be more committed to the solution once we have to start executing. The second common mistake managers make is to avoid conflict. And really avoid conflict in 2 different ways. And the first common way leaders avoid conflict is they avoid having to confront people who are misbehaving or who are just behaving subpar. They're not taking the time to have feedback about expected performance and when people aren't actually acting up to that expected performance. And that's a problem because, look, I mean, I get it. No one wants to have this conversation. It's an annoying conversation to have. No one wants to sort of be the bad guy, be the downer on the team. Except it's kind of your job to be the downer on the team in those moments. You can't just let somebody consistently slide in their performance. It's been said often, you don't get what you expect, you get what you inspect, and that means you need to be willing to inspect people's work and make productive, constructive comments on it to help it increase. And everybody on your team is watching, by the way. If you're letting performance slide, if you're letting insubordination slide, people on your team are watching that and they're going to adjust their reactions accordingly. So you can't avoid that type of conflict. The other type of conflict you can't avoid is conflict in the discussions with the team, is conflict over ideas. Somewhere along the line, someone, whether it's from training or in business school or HR or whatever, gave us this sort of conflict resolution diagram, and we started thinking we need to apply this every single time people disagree. That's not true. I mean, personal conflicts, vindictive conflicts, conflicts that are sort of destructive and toxic, yeah, we need to resolve those as quickly as possible. We may even have to invite people to be toxic on a different team. But if we're fighting over ideas, if we have conflict over solutions, those are great. That's actually the sign that we've got a lot of diverse thinking on the team, and we want to encourage that. We may have to teach people the rules of how to fight right so that they can have that conflict and stay respectful, but we want that conflict. That's not conflict to be avoided. So two different types of conflict on your team, both sort of underperformance conflict or conflict around insubordination. You may have to engage in that conflict, but you also have to make sure that you can play referee to positive task-focused conflict as well that'll help push your team to better ideas and better solutions. The third common mistake managers make is to react urgently, meaning when the situation changes or when new tasks are assigned, they fall prey to that sort of tyranny of the urgent. One of the biggest things teams need is clarity. They need to understand what the priorities are. They need to understand what to be focused on, and they need to know what other people on the team are focused on as well, so they know what to expect. If you've ever spent the whole day waiting on a deliverable from somebody else on the team and then found out that they didn't even know that was your priority, they didn't know it was important, so they weren't planning on working for it later, you know exactly what I mean. Teams need to know what the priorities are. And unfortunately, what happens for a lot of managers is that the reward for good work, the reward for a high-performing team is more work. And so new things come in and disrupt that ranking of priorities. And if you're just reacting urgently, if every new thing becomes the new priority, well, then your team's performance is actually going to suffer because most new things aren't a priority. And the team needs you to set those priorities every single time. So you need to react. You can't not react, but react intelligently, react deliberately. Say, hey, here's the new situation, here's the new thing we've been asked to do, and here's where it ranks on the list of priorities. So here's what's still priority one and what is still our focus. Don't react urgently, react deliberately, and that'll help your team perform because they'll know what to perform on. And the fourth common mistake that managers make is to assume availability, right? They assume, hey, I've got an open door policy. Hey, my office is all, you have my cell number. Anytime you want, you can contact me. We assume often that we are way more available than we really are, right? Because when that person comes into our office, we're also sort of staring at the Outlook number of new messages going up, right? Or we're looking at our phone often, or people say, hey boss, can I book some time with you? And you're actually like, oh, how's next Thursday? You're sending a message that you're not actually all that available, right? You're sending a message that yeah, you say you have an open door policy, but you're willing to close it at a moment's notice and close off all of those other people. And that's a problem because it doesn't take very many rejections for people to just stop coming. So how do you reverse this? I mean, first of all, don't assume availability. Be deliberate in showing what your availability is. Don't say I have an open door policy. Have moments of the day where you're standing outside the door doing nothing deliberately so people can come. Or better yet, walk around to have conversations with those people. And we're not talking about sipping on your coffee and telling them about their TPS reports. We're talking about making time for unstructured conversations or questions that they ask, not things you need to tell them. If you're in a hybrid or remote environment, you might even consider scheduling moments of availability, taking maybe an hour a week. Every Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern, I'm on Zoom at this link. Drop in if you want. Not everyone's going to show up, but they are going to show up to ask you specific questions. And then actually afterwards, they're going to go even further and maybe ask you some other questions or share some things about their personal life. You're going to get to know them better because you've been deliberately available, not because you just assumed availability and you just assumed that they knew you were available too. And in fact, speaking of availability, if we look at all four of these, that's probably where I would start. Right? I would start being more deliberately available for your team, whether that's standing outside the open door policy, walking around more often, or scheduling those specific office hours. Because if you do that, you're going to have people come to you with questions about priorities, and that's going to help you be a little bit more deliberate, maybe not react as urgently. If you do that, you're going to have people come to you maybe in conflict when they're both can't settle a conflicting idea, and you can teach them how to fight right over it. Or you're going to be more clued in to misbehavior that you might need to confront. When you make yourself available, you're going to hear from your people much more often. And that means that you're not going to fall prey to talking first as often as well. While it's important not to talk first, not to avoid conflict, not to react urgently, it's probably most important not to assume availability and make a point to be available for your people. When you do, you're gonna get the opportunity to do that coaching and mentoring thing that really attracted you to leadership in the first place. And when you do, they're gonna be the beneficiaries of it. And their work product is going to increase, their collaboration is going to increase, and you might just find yourself leading a team that can do their best work ever. Oh, and one more thing. This is a pretty standard list of 4 mistakes, but maybe you're ready to go beyond those mistakes and increase your leadership capacity, in which case you're gonna wanna check out this video here on 5 simple ways to become a great leader. It's a great watch, and I guarantee you, you're going to be a better leader as a result of having watched it.